Hello, Radio Free Skaro listeners. Stephen here with some archive content in the lead-up to our three-part Miniscope on the works of director Rachel Talalay. Rachel has been a friend to us here at RFS, appearing no fewer than 6 times, and we thought it was worth re-releasing our interviews and commentaries with her over the years as a lead-in to our conversations about her work on Doctor Who. This week we have 3 bonus episodes for you. First up, from episode 507 of Radio Free Skaro, Warren visits the home of Rachel Talalay in Vancouver for an extended discussion about the making of Heaven Sent and Hell Bent.
Okay, I'm here with director of Hell Bent and Heaven Sent, Rachel Talalay. Hello, Rachel.
Hi, it's so good to have you here.
Thank you. And thank you for making me your home. There's copious amounts of Doctor Who paraphernalia here that I won't tell anybody about.
Anyway. You're making people jealous.
Yes, that's what I'm doing, exactly.
There's the slate.
The slate is right in front of me for both these episodes. That's kind of crazy. Okay, so to start with Heaven Sent, I'm just going to consult my notes. Shooting with just Capaldi, what were the challenges of doing that? Because it's all him. Is it a question of scheduling because he gets tired? Or does he get tired? Because that's a hell of a job he just did.
No, he doesn't get tired, and he doesn't have any choice about whether or not he gets tired. So he was with us 12 hours a day, or 11 hours a day, 11 and a half hours a day, every single day. And it was almost impossible to schedule anything that he wasn't in. A couple of inserts here and there, and that was it. So he was with us the whole time. And I was a little bit concerned about that. Of course, his response was, this is the greatest opportunity for an actor ever. And Peter is such an incredibly enthusiastic doctor. And he loved him. He just adored the episode. So, and the fact that the episode was so complex and so challenging, he spent he is very responsible about spending time on set anyway. But he didn't leave set even when we were setting up most of the time, because he just became engaged in the actual whole filmmaking process, not just in his acting portion of it. So many, many actors would have taken any break they possibly could have. But Peter, it's such a team effort. And it's sort of hard to believe that, because you look at him acting his socks off and you think, how are you going to go from here to there? But and don't you need to go off and have your time and your space? But he didn't. He's just so, he was more engaged by being around the whole time. So the challenge of it were how to make it, and on the Doctor Who budget. Excuse me. So the challenges were, where can we film all these pieces? Initially, I was told it was going to be the Doctor alone in a haunted house with weeping angels. When initially they called me about it. And then Stephen came back and said, no, I don't want to do weeping angels. I want to create a new monster. And I was like, that's great. Because I was afraid that weeping angels, what could you do? You really don't want to follow up the episodes that's the highest rated episode ever and think, well, how can I make that new? So I was really excited to have the veil. And then, but when it became this clockwork moving castle, it was like, okay, this is much more complicated than a haunted house. Moving rooms in a haunted house is editing. Physically moving castle is really a challenge.
We'll get to the complexity of it, but I was going to talk about the horror part of it, because I noticed your horror background definitely comes into play there. But it seemed, I don't know, low-key isn't the right way to put it. It seemed more subtle than a horror film, if that makes any sense.
Well, the veil, so I had a long chat with Stephen about it, because it was difficult. It was obviously a difficult script to write because, or maybe not obviously, but there's so many layers to it. So it's if you watch it over and over again, you'll keep finding new things. And when you read it over and over again, so I would have these sort of moments of clarity, even as we were prepping, where I thought, okay, I thought I understood this, but actually this has a whole nother layer as well. And so that when it came to the horror, you have this monster that the Doctor can run away from. So I said, it's really hard that's a challenge, because you don't feel instantaneously threatened. And Stephen, I said, do you want to set up something that shows what the veil can do early on. Because the classic version, like that horror film, It Follows. Is that what it's called? It Follows. It's the one where the monster's coming after you. And a classic version of that would be that you see this horrific death to start with, and then you know what's coming up.
Like any Jason film, for instance.
Yes, yeah. So you'll see, so you know what it's capable of, and then you know to be afraid. And Stephen said, no, I mean, the great thing about Blink is that you don't know what's going on for a period of time. And so he really wanted to make it about that rising arc and that rising ability to understand what's going on, as opposed to pandering to the audience. And I said, well, I'm still concerned. I was wrong. But I'm still concerned about it being slow. And, if the Doctor can keep escaping it, can we really, so there's some distance from classic horror tension. And I had to think a lot about how to make that really work and be scary when you know that he can get away. And that's why it has a different tonal structure, is because what you're really playing with the audience is, but it never stops. It never stops. And in the original script, there was more discussion of, I'm not getting any sleep. I only have this much time, so in the montage area in the middle, where sort of God knows how much time has passed. And I can't answer that either. But, at any point in that montage in the middle, you could be in any of 4.5 billion years. You could be in any incarnation of 4.5 billion years in that montage. So, and this was a long conversation on set with Peter and me. Where do you think you are mentally at this moment? And you have to sort of strip down to the purity and say, well, I don't know what's going on. I don't know that I've been in here 7,000 or 12,000 or so. Everything is about that purity. And so then it becomes about just, well, what is this actual scene about?
Since it was mostly confined to one set, I assume, did
Not
you guys?
At all.
Oh, okay, never mind then. Did you guys shoot it in sequence, or
not at all?
So that made it even more complicated, because he's got to be at year 7,000 without knowing it, but still hinting at it in a way to the audience. You know what I mean? Like,
so what made the prep so difficult was that we didn't have time. And also it's expensive to build every set that we needed to build. And build every set that was written. And we knew we were going to go to some castles, but everything had to connect and look seamless. So I'm so thrilled that you think we were in one set.
That's what's conveyed anyway, yeah.
So we were in Caerphilly Castle, we were in Cardiff Castle, and then we were on sets. And we also looked at I'm going to forget the name of it now, St. Donuts, which is St. Donuts. Mm-hmm. I always make it sound like, that's my American, I make it sound like donuts, but St. Donuts, which was a William Randolph Hearst castle, where we ultimately didn't end up shooting, but until about 3 days before production, we were looking at sets, at rooms in there. So we had to make everything, Michael Pickwood was brilliant in terms of making everything feel like it, and absolutely no time. So when we dropped out of St. Donuts and we had to build the bedroom, he had about 3 minutes to build it. And so those are the production things that happen on every show, not just Doctor Who, but it's amazing when you can make it all integrate and come together and feel like, oh, of course, that's exactly what you should do. It's obvious.
And you mentioned, we talked back and forth about this off air, about the editing. Just how difficult was it for the editor and for you and for anybody else to keep track of what the hell was going on in that montage? Because it's seamless and it makes sense when you're watching it, but I don't know how it makes sense.
So let's start with before the montage. Mm-hmm. If you go back to the script, almost every clause in the script is its own shot. So, and often each shot was done at a different place. So sometimes he comes down a hallway that's a set, goes into a hallway in Caerphilly, goes into a hallway, and goes down a staircase in Cardiff, and ends up on a set on the stage. So the script supervisor and the AD and I had to keep track of: do we really have every single piece that links? And with Stephen's scripts, everything matters. So what you think, is walking down a hallway, just walking down a hallway, isn't just walking down a hallway. Then you have these television screens that are telling you where the veil is at all times. And you never have full geography in the house or in the castle. And so how do you tell both those stories? And it's only the veil's point of view. You're never actually seeing the veil on the screens. So how do you make it clear that this point of view is the point of view, and how far away is he from where you are? And so all those things were, and then the editor gets all these pieces, and until I get in the editing room, there are pieces that he's not sure, as much as where exactly was that supposed to go? So I was drawing this picture, and there's a little YouTube piece of my sketches of, if you can call them that, or scribbles, of how, because even reading the script the first time, this castle with where is the teleport chamber and the circular corridor and the radial corridors, and then where is this garden in this castle? And how can you rotate the castle and still have these things?
How do you keep track when it's rotating?
Yeah, and still have these things. And and some of that is going back to discuss with Stephen what was in his mind. And some of that is completely me saying, I think this, and this. And then you do some conceptual art, and then you give it to Stephen, and he said, oh, that's exactly what I was thinking. Or, no, I definitely, or that's better than what I was thinking, which is really what you trying to achieve, or no, I really want this because of this. So always, and I get this question, Stephen's the ultimate arbiter, obviously, but yes, it's very much a director's piece as well. Now, getting to your question about the ending montage, Stephen was quite specific in writing the escalation of the montage. And the question was, how many iterations does it make sense to do? And how do you engage the audience? And I didn't say, when I was filming, I made sure that anything that I thought was going to be in the montage, that we had a couple of different angles for it. And Peter thought about, when we had time to discuss it, he thought about sometimes different ways to do things to put within the montage. But it's absolutely an editor's piece. And Will Oswald was just, I can't give enough praise to Will. He was incredible during the experience. And as we got into the actual flash frame kind of things, and Stephen said when we were talking about it, I know what we need to say, but I don't really know until I see it, whether it's going to be working. And from the very first edit, Will made it work. And it was still probably the thing that we worked on the most. After we got the story fully working, it's the flashy thing that we worked on the most. But he had it working from the very beginning through his, and he said, of course, it took him forever. And those flash frames, because there's a sound beat for each of them. There's he's done so many ththings to make it work. What was so interesting was that as you're watching over and over and over again, as you do, people are coming in, and the more times they see it, the more they're feeling that the first time you watch the repeat, that it's suddenly slow because they're so into the hipness of the later incarnations. And I kept stopping and saying, no, you have to remember, and this is really hard, but you have to remember what it's like to watch something for the first time. Because the first time you watch it, you're just thinking, wait a minute, why are they repeating? And so that has to be really, really clear that that's the story being told again. And the first personal test audience I had was my family and my younger daughter, who's 14. I could see her completely figure it out and just go, wait a minute. And then it'd be like, stop, Peter, stop. And no. And then, every thing that you wish for in an audience was right there with her talking throughout watching it. And then I said, okay, this works. And then we kept refining it. But for sure, we went in with the idea that we would use different. I went in with the idea that I would use different shots each time, and still try and tell the story, and try and make sure that there were enough of those shots.
Which really works, by the way.
And Will, I just want to. I can't say enough good things about Will, but Will, from an editorial standpoint, if I ever had got to sort of break it down, there's some edits in that, not just in the montage, but in the montage, but also within the show itself, that are absolutely brilliant, that are totally unconventional, and are the kind of edits that you would be told you shouldn't do or can't do or whatever. And he seamlessly makes them work.
What are some examples of those?
There's a beautiful set of shots in when the Doctor's waiting for the scene with Clara. He's sitting on the steps of the TARDIS, and there's two very, very similar close-ups, profile close-ups of the Doctor. And the camera has just moved a very small amount between the two profiles. And but they're almost identical shots, except that his backgrounds are completely different. But all the editing rules say you would never cut from a similar profile to a similar profile. And you need to go to something else. And when I saw it, I was like, that's amazing that works so beautifully. And the other person, I mean, there's so many people to praise in my production team, but Stuart Biddlecombe, who was the cinematographer, just utterly stunning lighting, and a beautiful camera operator. So lots of involvement in making the shots more beautiful. And I felt like because Stephen wrote the TARDIS, all the lighting changes not all the lighting changes, but the main lighting change in the TARDIS, which is it goes black, and that's the Doctor's mind when it passes out when he hits the water, and then the lights slowly come back on. We got to spend time in the TARDIS just experimenting with the lighting in the TARDIS, experimenting with the light sequencing, reprogramming some of the lighting sequences. So, and you're sitting in prep thinking, do I really get to do that? This is your nerd moments where you're just like, God, I just want to photograph everything I'm doing. It was...
Well, you were, technically.
Yeah. But while we're still testing, not while we're... this is just so cool that my job is to be in the TARDIS and play, and come up with ways to make it look more beautiful. So that's one example. There's some jump cuts that are absolutely seamless that I'm not going to give away, but there's one when he first is teleported and comes in to do what I call the hero speech. I'm going to find you and I'll never ever stop. There's a jump cut in there so now you can go back and look at it. That's fantastic. That it's absolutely should not work in any way, and works. And then there's a moment in the montage where the Doctor opens the door twice for no reason. It's just something that Will wanted to do. It wouldn't have occurred to me to say, do that beat twice within the sped through montage. Like, wow.
That's a Spike Lee moment. Spike Lee does that a lot, where he'll have a door open twice.
And it's just...
repeat shots. Yeah.
And it's just, there's absolutely no reason for it, but it just hits that moment. It gives it that extra impact. I thought, God, wow. That's why I love working with people who are, it's your dream to work with people who are, you always want them to be better than you are, is to make you look good.
Now, you mentioned the lighting, and I can't call him Stephen. I'm going to say Mr. Moffat specified direct. You didn't want direct lighting except for obvious practical stuff like torches and stuff like that. How, like you said in the DWM article, that was very difficult to pull off.
So he said, Stuart's cinematographer's first question was, well, how do we light this? Because, how do we do the night lighting? And one of the things about Peter is that he's quite pale. So when you light him too blue, if you go too night blue, it makes him more pale and more angular, which doesn't bother me. I think he's got the most beautiful skin and he can absorb whatever light you give him. But I was thinking, well, okay, let's go with, the classic nighttime sodium vapor look. And I thought, well, he actually is in the confession dial, so I can justify that as reflections off the confession dial. So people will think about that later on, I hope. But so we went for the warm orange lighting at night, but none of the light, except in the fireplace scene, is justified by anything. And if you dissect the lighting, because we went for this German expressionist, if you, for instance, the radio corridor where he's meets the veil the first time where the door is locked, or later he comes up in his dying, his burnt mode. all the shadows are in the wrong place, and it's all done for just beautiful for dramatic effect. So I kind of had to get everybody into this world where I said nothing has to make any sense. It can't make any sense, and nobody's going to care. They're just going to care that it looks great. But that's hard for people who've been all this time trained to make things, to justify the way things look. And I said, if you're going to go for German Expressionism, then... So the first time we lit through those slit windows, everything was all very symmetric and correct. And I'm like, no, let's, push it. And then I start pulling up images from Citizen Kane, as well as from Cabinet of Dr. Caligari, and said, let's think about William Randolph Hearst. Let's think about, Orson Welles, and let's just push the envelope a lot. But Stuart would come back and say, well, can he be carrying a torch through it? And Stephen right away said, no electricity, no torches, go.
And I think I read you also said that the Citizen Kane moment is where he drops the spoon in the soup, because it's like isolated, like Charles Foster Kane. Yeah.
So all that Stephen wrote there was he's eating his soup, because there's a scene that was one of the few scenes that was removed, which is that this idea that there's a pantry, a larder, that restocks itself. So the idea that when part of the montage of all the rooms reset themselves is that the world exists and the food is always there. And so he's just eating his soup and he's just thinking about these things. And it says he almost drops his spoon. And we got into this room. I never told Stephen I was doing the shot. Because we got into this beautiful room in Caerphilly Castle, and I just saw William Randolph Hearst. I just saw a man alone in this. So it was a directorial moment, and I said to Stuart, I want to do just one huge light here. I want the smoke here. And the other thing I was opposed to was smoke. I said, I want all the shadows to be hard, because there's and that was because I wanted the castle to be scary. And while we were scary and gothic in the garden, in the rest of the castle, I wanted, the minute you start adding smoke, everything becomes sort of soft and dreamy. And I was looking for the opposite of that sort of Barry Lyndon romantic castle look. I wanted everything hard, so I kept taking the smoke out. But then in the case of those shots of the man alone, to get the shafts of light, so there were no real rules. We were looking at each location and each set and saying, what's going to make this look the best?
You mentioned Barry Lyndon, and I know with Barry Lyndon, it's famous for having shot at super high-speed film, special lenses. You guys are using digital, which makes that a lot easier. But was that even a thing you did, or was it kind of, it's not conventional lighting, but was it a conventional lighting arrangement used differently? Or did you actually take advantage of the fact that digital could shoot with a lot less light than before?
Oh, we took advantage of the fact that, the amazing thing about Barry Lyndon was that it was unheard of on film to shoot just with candlelight.
It was impossible until then. Yeah.
Until then. Now you can, you can shoot to your lighter, and so none of that. So we had a huge amount of latitude and flexibility. And as I always talk about, because I'm so blown away by the grader, that as long as there's exposure, then when you go into the grade, you have this place where you just, you can twiddle and fiddle and make everything even better. So, although I have to say that we spent less time in the grade because it was already looking beautiful. We spent much less time in the grade doing that and more time doing things like adding the sky to Gallifrey and things that, obviously a lot of more time spent correcting Gallifrey because there's no control of the harsh light in
outside.
In Fuerteventura, in the Canary Islands.
Now you mentioned Gallifrey, but in the DWM article, you actually say that you didn't know, even though you're directing the next one, you didn't know a lot about it while you were doing Heaven Sent.
I knew we were going to Gallifrey,
and that's it.
And Stephen won't tell you, doesn't like to talk about. He wants you to have, and I'm really appreciative of this on the level of how it helps me direct, but while I'm trying to prep, it's really hard. But he doesn't like to give anything away. He likes you to read it. He likes to get it down on the page, and he likes you to read it. So there's no real spoilers beyond I knew we were going to Gallifrey. So I had no idea where we were going. And what is great about why I like that is that for me, the virgin moment of reading something for the first time is what I keep in my head for what the audiences should feel at all times is how I felt the first time I read it. That's what they should feel. So if I get lost in the exhaustion and the things not working and if I get lost in the filmmaking, I can always stop with the scene and say, what did I feel when I read this? But if Stephen's taken away the surprises, then that doesn't have its purity.
Mm-hmm. No, but
not to sound pretentious, but
no,
it's true.
That's fine. Go right ahead. But you, even though you were working with Jenna Coleman, you didn't know she was going to be the next one?
Oh, when I read episode 11, I didn't know, and it was one of the first questions I asked, because I said, oh no, do I not get to work with Jenna? And they said, no, she's going to be in 12. Mm-hmm. And I said, how? And they said, wait, just wait and see. And I don't ask Stephen the questions because I know he doesn't want it, unless it's something I absolutely need to know to be able to prep. Mm-hmm. I don't ask him anything about where he's going, and every so often he'll give you a little hint, or he'll tell you something he's excited about or something you need to know practically. But I'm just as surprised as the audience as these things happen. And it was particularly, two things. It was important in Heaven Sent that we never telegraphed the amount of time. We never telegraphed the repetition. And in Hellbent, it was important that the diner scenes never gave anything away in terms of that you believed in the diner scenes that the doctor had wiped her, not the other way around, until it's finally revealed at the end. So knowing that, and the first time I started reading it, I have that same response, which is, what's he doing? Why are we starting in the diner in Nevada? Is this, what do you call it when the Clara...
a splinter.
Yeah,
splinter
is this
car.
a splinter?
Yeah, that was my first thought too, yeah.
Yeah, is this a splinter car? And then Clara, and what's he doing? Why aren't we writing Gallifrey? And then we go to Gallifrey, and it's like, where are we? What? So I had all the same responses as an audience. And then it just gets, your just brain goes. And it's the same thing as in Heaven Sent. The first time he goes into the TARDIS in Heaven Sent, when you read it, you think, wait a minute, was all that what's the past and what's the future? And you have this wonderful moment of then going, no, okay, I see that this is all his mind, and this is in the blink of an eye.
Now, I'll get to Hellbent, but speaking of Jenna Coleman, when I was watching Heaven Sent, and there's what presumably is Clara with her back to him, it almost works better knowing that it's not her, that it's a quote-unquote fake. Was that intentional?
It's not a fake. It is her.
Oh, it is her. Okay. Because it felt like it was put on.
Here's what it is. We put... Stephen wanted somebody who was... Here's the truth. Here's the behind-the-scenes truth. So Jenna wasn't available the first day we shot, and we had a stand-in. Stephen wanted the person artificially still.
Mm-hmm. That's probably what kept me up. Yeah.
Yeah. And we then... I was really unhappy with the stand-in. And basically, then when the day I did have Jenna, I reshot that or pieces of her. And basically, there were a couple of times when I digitally took the stand-in out and cut Jenna out and put her in where... But because of that, it's even more, because we made her more artificially still, because we worked to slow down that little, and that's where the grader's a genius. Because I said, there's a little bit of movement there, and that would be an expensive digital effect. But he was like, okay, I'll just still frame that. They do magic things that I don't. It's unbelievable. The flies. Now I'm going to give a shout out to the online guy. I mean, the online guy's just supposed to put the thing together. Ultimately, he is, and do some dissolves and some simple things. He ended up doing all the flies. So I thought, we gave him to milk to budget. It was way more than we could ever afford to do. So then it was, well, we're going to shoot some green screen flies, and then we'll put some, little lines buzzing around. We also, when I talk about testing funny things, we tested plastic flies. We put plastic flies within the veil. We, wire flies buzzing around. We did all those things. But to get really the feel of lots of flies, ultimately, the online guy went and took some of our green screen flies and digitized them all and put them in about 10 times as many shots as I ever thought we were going to have. And it's so much better for it. And that's the Doctor Who way, that everybody takes their world and says, how can I make it better?
And you did that with the Lush bath bomb glove.
Yes.
Practical effect that cost like $10 or something.
Yeah. So I was just frustrated because this dissolving hand, milk wanted a lot of money. And I knew what a great effect we would get. And I knew that Stephen wanted it. And they didn't have that. They were so busy with the episode before, the effects guys. I'm like, we can figure this out. And they showed me some stuff. They put acid on a kind of styrofoamy thing, and I just hated the way it looked. And I said, so we were spitballing. And I said, well, what about a bath bomb? And then they all laughed at me, and I said, no, really? So I go and buy this kid's bath bomb kit. And I said, no, my kid, they make them this is how you do it. And I shoved it in a rubber glove I was with my other daughter, and, with little sticks, popsicle sticks. And then we did a demo, and it's up, I'm going to put a link up at some point. It's really ridiculous. It fell apart, and but it worked. But it worked. Yeah. And it ended up being, it's a version of it is in there, and they had to, then the effects guys said, okay, I guess you're serious. And they had to figure out how to paint it black without it dissolving. And, but yeah, you have to, and everybody laughed. I came in the morning with that, because they're used to me going to John Smith and coming in with these incredible demos of things that he has done to help me out. And suddenly I come in with, that's like my drawings, my crayon drawings, with coffee stains on them. That's my version of
Maybe you should explain John Smith, YouTube VFX whiz. Go watch his videos; they're amazing. Was your consultant on this?
Yes. So he is a lovely young man from Vancouver. So sorry if I've given something away. And went to school with one of my daughters, and it has these incredible videos since he was 14, 15-year-old, these fan Doctor Who videos, and then this incredibly successful Who-Lock mashup video that has something
millions of views. It's ridiculous.
Millions and millions. I mean, he told me it was 4.6 million. And he's incredibly inventive. And so when I had to do the falling sequence, I just said, and he's such a fan, so just talking to him at all about things. But it's funny because he never wants any spoilers. So I have to call him up or Skype him and say, okay, can I spoil you enough to help me with something and yet not give anything away? So we sort of found our world where I didn't ruin it for him, but he could still help me because, why not? You use any resource you have. And he's full of really inventive ideas. And so I learned a huge amount. And it was tremendously helpful. And he did some demos and because he's just so fluent with that stuff. And I just came off the Flash, and the previs guys, there are previs guys. Mm-hmm. So you say blah, blah, and then you get this amazing previs. Well, Doctor Who doesn't have the money for a previs guy. Anybody who's available is doing not previs, but what ends up on the screen. Mm-hmm. They don't have the time to, so... he was actually able to do some previses so I could talk about things. So there's everybody working 24/7 to make things as good as you possibly can.
I should probably get to Hellbent. My main thing is, how difficult is it just mentally to prepare yourself for the fact that you're being handed, I mean, you've done a finale before, but you're being handed the finale, it's Clara's last adventure, and it's Gallifrey.
It's Gallifrey.
They hand you the keys to the car, this one, like really.
Yeah.
Like, so how terrifying is that?
I think that you can't, you're so in the middle of it, you can't think, well, what am I going to do with Gallifrey? Showing episode 12, showing Hellbent to people who are not Doctor Who fans, it is utterly incomprehensible. Mm-hmm. There's not, I mean, it is a love letter to the fans.
Oh, yes, it is.
And even if, and I know that there are the Moffat detractors, and I know that who are angry with him, but this is a full-on love letter, and to the fans and to Doctor Who. And so to be handed that, all you can do is respect that. And then, for instance, what are you doing with the Citadel that's the same and different? What are you doing with the costumes that's the same and different? Well, in terms of the visual effects, there's an expert at Milk who's the Gallifrey visual effects expert. I sit down with him, say, okay, what did they do here? What does this mean? So you have people to help you in terms of the costumes. We spend a lot of time at the Doctor Who Experience where a lot of the stuff is kept, and going back to the other episodes and saying, what worked, what didn't. Okay, now we have Donald Sumter, not Timothy Dalton. What should be different? What looks good? What doesn't? It's terrifying, but all you can do, you also have no time. Mm-hmm. So all you're doing is moving forward and saying, okay, is this good enough? Do we build our own classic TARDIS set? Do we, or can we take the one from? And Stephen, it was easier in terms of that stuff to turn to Stephen all the time, mm-hmm. and sometimes to Peter Capaldi, and say, because they have it's so much part of their entire childhood. And, they embarrassedly printed the fact that I did spend most of my childhood in America, so watched more Star Trek growing up than Doctor Who, although I was in England for 2 years where I watched mm-hmm. loads of Doctor Who. But that's not the same as having the entire vocabulary, the entire vocabulary of classic Who. So I admit, and I don't pretend to compete with the fans about that. All I can do is respect that. So some of the ideas, I would just say, okay, thinking this and this, Stephen, mm-hmm. how does that? And I was worried that the headdresses are so awkward, and did we need to make changes to them? So no, absolutely not. Things like that. Mm-hmm. And I learn as I go. So in terms of, but also even the question of how sandy should Gallifrey be? Sometimes there's peaks with snow. Sometimes it's quite rocky. Sometimes it's full on more desert-like. So what is Gallifrey?
So I guess the next question I'd ask is, there's, unlike Heaven Sent, which is a very specific tone to it, this is, I say all over the map in a good way. There's a ton of different, there's Western, there's epic, there's the whole weird political thing with the Time Lords. It's all over the place. There's a little intimate thing in the TARDIS, like in an old TARDIS. Like, how are you able to get all those tonal shifts and make it all work? Because you did make it work.
And you don't know you're going to. You don't know what's going to work. I mean, it's so much in editing is making sure that the tone stays together, even when the not necessarily clear as you're doing every bit. I think that one of the hardest bits was making sure that the diner melded in and out really well. The opening in the desert, I mean, all the Western stuff was clearly its own section, So I knew that I knew what I was doing there, and I knew what Stephen wanted. And the clear thing about that was make the Doctor iconic, make these shots incredibly iconic. And I had a funny response because Brian said, "Don't go too far. Like, don't go so far that you're alienating." And I mean, that's not exactly the words he used, but that's what he meant. Like, don't make it style over substance. And that's a really, and then he came back and said, "I know you won't, but I just have to say it." And that's the sort of difference between Sergio Leone being so stylized and it works so beautifully But here we had all the ingredients of Sergio Leone, but we were still trying to get we had all the other things we had to say. So you're looking for the iconic images, but you have to make sure that you're also compelled. So you're just, kind of making it up. I don't know. Then you get to the extraction, and you get on to inside Gallifrey, and you get into the cloisters, and really, that's a very strange section because there's the horror. He wrote all the monsters in the same, finding the monsters sort of in the same scene rather than kind of letting that grow. And I worried a lot about how talky that was, making the sliders make sense. There were lots of things in that section that worried me. And it's got to be scary, but we're also telling a complicated story. So I found that section really hard. And then once we get out of there and we get into the classic TARDIS, once they steal the TARDIS and run away, then it's just good storytelling and emotional stuff. I read something where someone said, if you go back and watch it, the interesting thing is that actually it's an incredibly talky episode. I mean, it's silent for 15 minutes or whatever.
Yeah, at the start he doesn't say a word.
Yeah, he doesn't say a word, which is just brilliant. And then it's, really not a huge, it's the opposite of Death in Heaven, where you're blowing up, much more comfortable with flying Cybermen and blowing up airplanes and all that stuff. That's like, okay, I can do that. That's great. I get to do Avengers. I'm thrilled. Now everything has its own emotional impact and a lot of talky stuff. And how do we keep that going? So I worried a lot. And I worried about how the fans were going to react to Hellbent, which is a bad place to be. Mm-hmm. You don't ever want to be thinking...
Because it distracts you from the actual making of it.
Yeah. You don't ever want to think, am I doing right by this? And how are they going to react to the very end?
Mm-hmm. You're never going to please all of them. Yeah. So don't even try.
So I often talk to people, especially personally before it came out, and said, I know this is going to be a divisive episode. I know that people are going to have issues with everything in this episode. So I can just, it's stupid, but I can just do my best. And
well, what else can you do? Right?
But I said, I can't. This is what I'm given. And so I'm always looking for just how do I make it as dramatic. And then Peter comes in and just, it's, he's just magic.
Yeah. I think in an email you sent to me, you said, hey, it's all them. I'm just pointing the camera.
The cinematographer Seamus McGarvey came and gave a talk at UBC and said, point the camera at the story, which was how he sees cinematography. And I thought that's a brilliant quote, because it's not point the camera at my cool images, point the camera at my spectacle. And of course, we're looking to make it, but you want the camera should be enhancing always the story, not just be about the images. And I think that that's sort of the greatest education I've had as I've learned more and more about filmmaking is, you can story first, then visuals. And if the visuals are enhancing the story, then you've won.
But there is one shot, which I was curious if it was just put in for effect or what the reasoning was for it, because it works really well. It's where Clara's giving the Time Lords a hard time, and then there's a slider just subtly in the background going by, and I'm like, was that afterwards? Like, what's it for? Like, it really adds to the atmosphere, but...
That's pure luck. I mean, and there's takes without it and takes with it. We just had the sliders. They were just moving around in the background of all the shots. I mean,
so they're like on a carousel or something? Or?
No, they're on those, the new trendy segways without the...
Oh, the hoverboards that they used in the other one. Yeah.
They're on the hoverboards. And, and so they're just sliding around, but it's a maze of mess that they're working their way around. And I wanted to, and they're in beautiful, actually, if you see photographs of them, it was just a beautiful design. They would catch little glimpses of light in different shots. And sometimes I didn't want them to feel like they were too close ever, but they had to be close enough that they were present. So that was a tough, and there was no science to when they came through. There was really more of a science in editing to when if you had them, when you could use them. So that was purposely used editorially, but I didn't specifically, I'd love to say I did, but I didn't specifically send one through at that time. I want to ask you,
go ahead.
about, since I haven't listened to your Hellbent podcast, what were the most sort of divisive sets of...
We liked all of it. I can't think of anything that we personally, the three of us, thought was divisive. I honestly loved every last bit of it, especially, and I'm going to get to this. Well, first, before I get to the classic TARDIS stuff, because you said that was tough to shoot, you watched old classic episodes about, like, presumably Deadly Assassin and all that.
Yes, Deadly Assassin is the main one.
It's kind of the gold standard, yeah. But and you said some of it worked and some of it doesn't, and maybe you could go into what you tried to put into this and what you said, no, there's no way that's going to work in a modern context.
Well, I watching Deadly Assassin in particular, because that's the one I thought about. I mean, I thought about the most, not because it's the lone, I love Tom Baker, and not because it's the lone doctor one, but because there's a lot of Gallifrey in it. And when you go back and look at Gallifrey, there's green cellophane things, lighting things. And we talked about, should we do some of those things? Should we, where's the balance? And Stephen said about when we rebuilt the classic TARDIS, he said, it doesn't have to be identical because, for instance, he said, don't put old television screens in, put new, but then it has to still completely look like. Mm-hmm. And so looking at the TARDIS, there's a book on, sort of TARDIS through the ages, which I read in detail. And thinking about what's in the TARDIS and what makes it feel like home versus what, and I didn't want anything that took away from just the look of the TARDIS. I didn't want any stuff there, plants and things that made it, got in the way of the graphic look of it. But, so it was more things like that I thought didn't work and that we couldn't do and sometimes you look at some of the versions of the Time Lords. There's a version of the headdresses that was really beautiful, but they're instead of solid, they're like garden chairs.
Oh, okay, yeah.
You can see through them, and they're beautiful to shoot through. Mm-hmm. But they end up sitting down in chairs and looking like they're part of their headdress is part
chair.
of the things like that. And my first response is no, I want to shoot those headdresses because they're you can look through them and that's more visual, and then it's like
And they used those in Day of the Doctor, I think.
Yeah,
certain ones did.
Yeah, and it's hard. All those things are so hard. You're just guessing, and it's not like you have months of testing. Mm-hmm. I mean, you've got 3 weeks of prepping this entire show. When we went to scout the Canary Islands, which is 2,000 miles from London. We flew in that morning, got a 5 a.m. flight, flew in that morning, scouted the entire Fuerteventura and flew out and got home basically just did a 24-hour scout. So the glamour is, because that's all the time we had. If we had stayed overnight, we would have lost the whole next day. And
that's Gallifrey, and it's also Nevada, I assume, as
yes.
well. Yeah, okay, that makes sense. So you had to find a truck. That was an American kind of truck.
Yes, and that was, that was left-hand drive, and we had to find locations that were right next to each other because we shot there for such a short period of time. So locations that were right next to each other but looked or somewhat different.
Mm-hmm. Is the barn, is that the Canary Islands too?
Yeah.
So you had to reproduce the barn?
So they had to build the barn. Mm-hmm. The interior of the barn was on stage.
Yeah, of course, yeah.
But so they built, it's only 2 sides, the barn, that we put up. And it was so windy that it was a massive construction project to keep it up in the desert like that. And then we had no roof on it. The roof is digital, giving things away here.
That's quite right.
So that lots of times you're shooting shots where you'd like to be wider, but you can't be because it's going to be the cost of adding a digital roof, which is not money that you want to spend compared to where you want the 2 TARDISes to fly.
Speaking of VFX, there's probably a fair bit in Heaven Sent too, but there's just a ton of obviously VFX in this. How was that to deal with?
Because a lot of them are the Gallifrey. I mean, it's Milk's really interesting because they are incredible. First of all, they're incredibly brilliant, but they're incredibly attentive to the huge ones. And then when you get to the smaller ones that seem easy, they're like, oh yeah, wait a minute, we forgot to do, we've been so busy on this, making this amazing. And it's true, like they were really, really, you say that there's not as much in, which probably there isn't, because you don't have the spectacle, but making the castle, the walls of the castle and things like that. They did a phenomenal job. And some of the underwater stuff, which is a combination of some underwater, some green screen, some tank work, some green screen, and making that all match. And match with the castle and all those things. And them also, saying, okay, how is this clockwork castle going to work? But I love doing all that stuff. So, we say it's hard. And the fact that they had the basis of Gallifrey already. So we were just, where are we taking? They had the Citadel in their computer.
Right.
Just not in any kind
From various other shows like that, yeah.
But always at a distance. So where they had to go was, Stephen, we're absolutely going inside.
And they do that bloop thing as you go through the...
Yeah, that was them. That was brilliant. As you go through
the sort of dome, I guess,
yeah. Last minute thing I added, when they run down the corridor and they go into the elevator, when they make the man flu line, I said the only corridor we had was a reuse corridor, and I thought this looks like everything else. So I went and said, can I add another digital matte painting? And that's where we ended up with that huge view inside that looks very sort of steampunk inside, where you see down the corridor, and there's but you're also all the way outside Gallifrey.
Right. Yeah.
And I'm so happy that we ended up with that. Because it's one of the times you feel like you're both within the Citadel and not. I mean, within the world and still inside and not just in a set. So asking for things like that, begging for things like that was really worth it in terms of just touching on a different type of Gallifrey.
Well, now, one thing you mentioned, we didn't find it divisive, but one thing that probably the less enlightened fans might have found divisive was the fact that, what's his name? Ken Bones, is that his name?
Yeah.
The general.
Yes. Let's talk about that regenerates into a woman.
Into a black woman.
Yes.
And I'm like, well, that's really cool. And it turns out the only guy he's ever been is what he just regenerated out of. Was that one of the things you were worried about with fans?
Definitely. Not that he regenerated as a woman, but just is that going to seem... why are you doing this? What's the point of doing this? And and Stephen said, if we're ever going to have a female doctor, that's an if. I said, if. So don't freak out, everyone. But if we are ever going to have a female doctor, we have to continue to show this idea that Time Lords can change. We've seen it with the Master. Yeah. And we have to continue this.
Although we haven't seen it. He's a real completionist. He had to show the War Doctor created out of Paul McGann, and he had to show him go into what is or isn't Chris Eccleston. So, yeah.
Yeah.
So, I can see why I did it.
But we can continue to show that Time Lords can regenerate and can change sex while regenerating. So that was important. I was more concerned, actually, there, not about the regeneration, but about the fact that the Doctor used the gun there. And that it's very unusual for the Doctor to just shoot someone. And even though it was completely justified and it was all part of this concept that the Doctor's going too far. So, don't think that these things aren't discussed in detail in terms of, I said, okay, this making sure that you understand that this is all part of trying to set up this idea that the Doctor's gone too far and that he's had to make these decisions later on because the tone of the moments when Peter says, I'm answerable to no one, for instance, and we do it, shot it a couple of different ways. How far does he need to go? And then this question of what is the hybrid? So what is the thought? Because I have a whole other theory on what's the hybrid, and I don't have the answers. Every so often people will act like I know what Stephen's thinking.
For me, I was like, well, what you said about your head being spaghetti, I basically just go, okay, I guess that's right. And I just let it pass. Just like with Heaven Sent, I was like, I don't think he was actually in there for 4 billion years. I don't think it was a copy of a copy. I think he's in the Matrix, and it's all more or less in air quotes in his head. And that's how I deal with it as I move forward. Yeah. But everybody has a different interpretation, and I assume it's the same for the hybrid too.
So I think it's really interesting that, and you should have a different interpretation. And it's hard sometimes for the fandom to be okay about the fact that
because we like to grab something and figure out the hell out of it way past sanity.
Because which I understand, and I think that he takes you in. hell-bent 4.5 billion years later. I mean, he says that's where we are, but we know that in season 10, he's time travel, so he can go back to where we were. And that's, so what's the, why, in some ways, why let that worry you? When the doctor says, I'm the hybrid, and I love this, it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. I went too far and I turned myself into the hybrid. But I don't necessarily think that that's the hybrid. I don't necessarily think, and this is entirely me, but I think that there may be a whole nother hybrid that's coming, because all is what this prophecy said, which doesn't say the doctor is the hybrid.
No, it says 2 warrior races, whatever that means.
Yeah, exactly. So that's my theory, is that the doctor thinks that the doctor sees that he went too far, and he sees that he could have fractured time and all those things. But so he sees he turned himself into a hybrid, but that doesn't make him the hybrid.
There could be more than one.
Yeah. That's my theory, and it's entirely theoretical.
And it goes with the crack in the wall, which we didn't figure out what exactly it was until Matt Smith's final episode, right?
Yeah.
But until that point, it could have been a number of different. So this could be the same. This could be the crack for Capaldi, the crackpaldi,
yes,
if you will.
And I've never had a conversation with Stephen about it, so this is not based on anything that I know more than...
It's your headcanon, basically.
Yeah, exactly. It's my headcanon. So I like the fact that it's a self-fulfilling prophecy, that he goes too far and he messes things. That's what I like about the hybrid story, and that's what I like in Hellbent, was that's where we're going, and that's where Stephen's going with it.
Now, speaking of the classic TARDIS, you mentioned that it was really painful to shoot in there compared to the regular TARDIS.
Oh my God, because it has no ceiling. So and the walls were, maybe 9 foot. The regular TARDIS is a full 360 degree set of beauty. And even though there are issues where you can't always get, you can't do the kind of dolly shots that you really want a techno crane in there, which you can't have. But the classic TARDIS is very, and they were really rushed to build it as well. So I would have loved it. And it needed taller walls so that you could do low angles. There's no chance of doing a low angle. So what they did originally was build a set where the boom mic, the old-fashioned boom mics could come over the walls.
And you see it every once in a while in the old show, yeah.
And they built that thing in the middle on the top, which I don't know what, that huge metal thing that may have a name, because we're always making up names for things. But they built that so that you could look across and you could drop down corners of it, so that, this is what I learned from reading my TARDIS book, so that you'd be hiding the edge of the sets. So we did that. We were able to drop it in different places to help hide the edge of the set. But you could never get into a low angle. And they were so rushed that they couldn't pick it up. So all the cords that ran the center console were just on the floor. We had to digitally paint them out, and then you have to shoot around that all the time. It's things like, it's really... So that I felt very much like I'm in that basic kind of set where you're stuck with all the things that...
Restrictions.
Yeah. It was hard to shoot. It was really noisy, like the compressor that makes the thing go up and down, just hugely noisy with a big clunk every time. There's classic stories of what you're trying to do, masses of dialogue, and this thing's going clunk, clunk in every shot.
Do they ADR after that because of that? Or?
A combination of editing around and not having it in every close-up, and then, and taking advantage of that, and some ADR when you have to, when you can't get the rhythm going. But
the sound effects really sold it too. When I hear the door opening sound effect or the scanner opening sound effect, as an old school fan, I'm like, mwah. Yeah,
and Will went and absolutely got all the old sound effects. He didn't, there was nothing new created. He went and got he went and got the original sound effects. There was no question that that's where we had to go. And it is, it's true. The door, though, you'll see if you look carefully that I avoided the door almost all the time, because the door was too short. So actually, when you see Peter going in and out, he has to duck his head. And like, oh, God, how are we going to shoot around this and make you not feel like we're shooting around the door and still see the cutout of the door?
Yeah.
but fake the fact that it actually wasn't.
Just like they did in the old show. Run, and then cut, and then they're out the door. Here they come out of the TARDIS, ta-da.
Yeah. And that question of what's actually outside those doors that don't match at all, the round TARDIS that looks like an old toilet. All those things you're just, but 50% of you thinks that's what makes it great. The combination of the fact that it's not quite right and it's absolutely right.
Well, it's a greatest hits TARDIS is what it is, in a way.
Yeah.
Okay, final question. What's next for Rachel Talalay that you can tell us about?
I can't tell you about the main thing that's next, which is so frustrating. I feel like that last year, too. I don't know if I'm doing Doctor Who next year. There has obviously been, not obviously, but Stephen has said to me, you're not done with Who. Mm-hmm. But that's
good to know.
But I don't have a direct offer. Mm-hmm. That's not me. It's true. That's not me equivocating, because for the long, I knew I was doing series 9 forever and had to pretend that
must have been torturous.
Oh, it was, and after, they didn't actually announce me till I was shooting. So I would run into people in Cardiff. I would, like, what are you doing here? Oh, just visiting, on a holiday. It's just
hanging out.
Yeah, hanging out. We've seen Peter. So the only thing I can talk about that's next is I've just finished an episode of The Flash, and then I'm going to do an episode of Legends of Tomorrow.
Oh, cool. And which is both done here in Vancouver.
Yeah. Which is great for me. But after that, I can't talk about.
Okay. Our lips are sealed. Well, I don't know anyway, so that's easily solved.
But good stuff. And good stuff coming up.
Thanks for listening. Coming soon, the director's commentaries for Heaven Sent and Hellbent.